Hey y'all, welcome back to Mum. I'm Ellen Wong, your host, and today I have the tremendous honor of introducing Alua Arthur, who is so close to my heart, one of my favorite people on this earth right now. She is a death doula. She is also a death educator through Going with Grace, a company that she built and is continuing to build with an amazing group of people. And she's a TEDTalk speaker, and she is also a New York Times bestseller now with her book Briefly Perfectly Human, which, if you have not read this book yet, or even if you had and you read it as a book, as a hard copy book, I highly recommend that you get the audiobook version and allow Alua to read to you, because she narrates the entire book. And because she wrote the book very much in her own speaking language, it very much feels like she's just talking directly to you. This is a book that I really needed to read this year, and I'm so glad that she put it out this year. I feel like with everything going on in our world right now, her memoir and the experiences that she had that shaped her life and shaped her as a death doula really resonated with me, and it just made me feel very seen, you know? And it's not that we share very similar upbringings or life experiences, it's the way in which she talks about these experiences and her vulnerability through the book that really connected deeply in my heart. And this is a conversation I feel that is so necessary right now, as much as I feel like this book is so necessary in the zeitgeist in the world right now, as we're witnessing and walking through and living through so much violence, so much death, so much change. And so, yeah, it feels like divine timing to have her on this podcast right now. So, as always, I love to start with a bit of grounding and anchoring. And so, find your feet and your legs connected deeply to the earth or firmly to the earth, securely. And I just invite you to take in a deep breath in through the nose and exhale. Feeling that anchoring in your body, feeling that connection to the earth. It's my honor to introduce Alua. Well, thank you for writing, creating this book. I thoroughly enjoyed Briefly Perfectly Human. It was just something I think I needed to receive in the moment that I actually listened to it. I didn't read it, with my eyes. Like, I listened to it, and it was so nourishing to hear your voice actually be the one, like, I felt like I was like hearing a storybook or something being just like offered by you. And just, I think there's so much it's like resonance that you hold in your voice alone, where when I receive it, and I was like driving back and forth from Idlewild to LA, where most of the time when I was listening to this book, and it just felt like you were there in the room, and I was feeling your heart so much. And I just want to say first, thank you for putting it out there. And I'm curious what prompted you to decide that you wanted to write this.
First of all, thank you for that, Ellen. Uh, I like to think that we were hanging out too, even though maybe I wasn't consciously there with you. I, in the like mid early days of the pandemic, long after people were just hoarding toilet paper, but before like Disneyland was back open and people were pretending nothing had happened, I wasn't able to sit with clients like I used to be able to, and it hurt. I was missing some central component of the work itself, which was the human and the storytelling and the togetherness. Simultaneously, I was noticing that so many of my friends and people that I knew were struggling in their own silos, feeling very alone. And we were, in large part, while we were doing things to connect. But there was a bit of the story medicine that passes usually that didn't seem to be passing at that time. Like I wasn't getting it from clients, I wasn't hearing it from other people, and mine as well was lost in the mix.
Mhm.
And so many of the themes seemed to be absolutely universal. And so I started writing some of them down, like the clients that I'd been working with, some of the things in my story that seemed to mimic what I'd heard from clients. And it just started coming. It was like a fire hose of words that I didn't really know what to do with. I did not intend to write a book. That was not what I planned to do.
Mhm.
But I started writing. The words needed to come. So they came and they came and they came. And then we had a decent amount there. And I showed it to somebody who said, I think you got a book. And I said, oh, shit. Well, damn it. Now I have to do it. So yeah, that was the impetus. It just needed to be done.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you provide that incredible vessel. Um, there was something that really struck me as I was listening to it. And I don't know, I mean, I feel like it was a conscious thing, but now having gone through your retreat training for death doulas, which was very life-changing for me. And I very much see myself as almost kind of like before the training and after the training. Like
Yeah.
there was something about that training that woke up something in me that I think had always been there but was perhaps dormant, and it
Mm.
sort of brought it out. But during the training, you took us through this exercise of contemplation on the different contemplations of dying.
Mm.
And the book to me read almost like a long meditation on
Mm.
the contemplation of dying, but told through your life experiences as a doula and just even pre-doula times. Was that conscious, or did that just kind of flow through?
That was not conscious at all. I've
Wow.
heard a lot of people talk about things that they saw in it. They were like, you talk about bodies a lot, or, how somebody's behaving with their body. And granted, I want to ground the work in the body anyway, but it was not conscious at all.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was like receiving from it. It just felt like, because I'd keep on going back to that contemplation over and over, and I've guided it a few times myself now. It
Great.
is powerful.
Isn't it something? And the fact that those were written in the 11th century and remain as potent, if not more so today than
Hmm.
back then, is stunning to me. They are noble truths, and I think these are capital T truths, not like my little T truths, but they're actual truths that underwrite how we live and thus how we die. That maintain those are the constants through it all. And
Mm.
I'm thrilled to hear that you that's what you gleaned from it, that's what you intuited, but it was not my intention. It's cool.
Oh, it's wild. Yeah, I just kept on coming back to it. And maybe because, and I'm going to weave my experience in the retreat so much because I feel like this book was almost kind of like that experience almost crystallized, and then hearing almost like little pockets being filled in with your life story. It just brought the training home in a way that it's almost like it cemented it deeper in me.
Yay.
Yeah.
Great. Then it's all working.
Yeah.
It's all working. I think it was an interesting choice to write it in memoir form.
Hmm.
Uh, and part of the reason I did was, I mentioned the story medicine, but also when I talk about the work, I've noticed that people learn best through story anyway.
Yeah.
It's like I can tell you the 15 things to do. Or I can tell you what happened with somebody while they were doing it and see what you pick up from there for your own. I don't have the hubris to suggest that I know how to live well, I'm using air quotes, and thus die well. But I have seen people do a whole lot of different things, and let me put it forth, and people maybe will learn from it. Um, and it's one thing to do it from a distance when I'm talking about clients. I can talk
Hmm.
about what I'm seeing, what they're doing, what they're sharing. It's another thing when talking about my own life and where I get to say, well, this is what I did, and you can, I mean, I fucked it up plenty, right? And I'm using that lightly, but I did. And there's plenty that people can either pick up and use or not. But overall, it's all a contemplation on mortality. Like
Hmm.
all of our lives are a contemplation of mortality. And in order to, I think, land the point, I had to tell my story as opposed to the stories of my clients. Plus, those stories weren't necessarily mine to tell. What I could tell was the impact that it had on me. Um, and so that comes up often, like, well, why memoir? And it's like, well, because, this is the perspective I know. This is the
Hmm.
I that I'm working from. And that's the one that I can speak to most clearly. And mine is a story on death as well.
Yeah. Well, it kind of strikes me again as I was reading, and even after I took the retreat training, I was starting to realize, like I mentioned, it felt like there was something dormant that kind of unlocked in me after receiving, the everything, every from the way you guys designed the training to all the exercises that were there, to everybody that was present in my particular group, in March 2023, everything. It felt like I started to wonder, like, are those of us who are called to death work almost, was it part of the plan all along? Was it part of our life journey? Was it part of our soul's journey from even before we incarnated here? Because when I read your book too, first of all, you write the way you talk. And I
Mm.
know that I received it first, like listening to you speak, but when I went back and started to read through different chapters, it writes or it reads the way like I hear your voice, and it's very conversational, which made it super accessible for me, first of all. And then what I found so interesting was that like your spirit really came through.
Mm.
Aside from death work, you have this very adventurous kind of spirit, I consider myself really adventurous. And then when I read some of the stories that you tell in the book, I'm just like, holy shit. I don't hold a candle to like the
You were like, girl, are you sure? Are you sure? Me too, though. Me too.
it's amazing to me. I'm just like, damn, like, okay. I mean, bravery, like that's the word that comes through. Like a lot of bravery and just like reckless abandon in the best way possible, you know? But it makes me wonder, like, do you feel like you were called almost like cosmically to this work?
That's a tough question to answer.
Yeah.
I think that tying back to what we were saying earlier, that it's much easier to see in memoir form to be
Yeah.
able to look back and say, oh, look at all these things that actually got me here. That major deaths were some of the formative moments in my life,
Mhm.
not of humans, but the ideas around death and dying. And it's easy to see in retrospect. I think very easily could have also ended up as a nail technician and been living my best life, drawing beautiful designs on people's hands because I value it so much.
Mhm.
Um, and yet, from where I sit now, it's easy to see how everything lined itself up. I think that those of us that come to death work, though, do share some basic qualities that make us more suited for it. And, I'm always curious about whether or not one or two decisions would have taken us on a different path. But,
Mhm.
ultimately, I think I probably would have ended up here anyway. It's
Mhm.
where I am in the most alignment, where I find no resistance within myself when thinking about death care, when talking about death, when supporting somebody through it. It's all pretty clear all throughout my body.
Yeah.
One thing that I meant to say earlier that got lost when I started talking about memoir is that the hope is that the work, the book work and like the course work and all the courses and even like the free webinars, that they all ring true of like a larger arc, which
Mm.
is that we are all going to die and there's power in our individual stories. And as we make peace with our story for exactly what it is, we prepare ourselves for our death that way, and we can reach our death in a manner that um, allows us to exalt our lives if we can make peace with our individual story. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. There's this piece in here that really struck me, and I think it struck me personally because of what I'm struggling through, particularly this year. And it was really about what you were talking about with like life purpose. I'm going to quote you back to you a lot
Okay.
through this conversation.
Okay. I'm gonna be like, who said that? I said that.
But you write in this one passage, now that I'm a death doula, I have work that brings a fullness to my life beyond anything I could have imagined. I'm grateful for it every day, but not nearly as grateful as I am for the mere opportunity to be briefly perfectly human, to feel cold and grief, to experience awe and taste sugar on my tongue, to watch as light glints from a disco ball in the sun. This is important. Because while we are obsessed with trying to make meaning and purpose out of life, we can miss the experience of being here. And I think that really struck me as somebody who, you know, like you talk about in your book, being a lawyer and stepping away from that profession. And I myself, about almost 6 years ago now, stepped away from being a creative director in digital marketing, digital agency. And like I think I've been in this moment of really, for lack of a better word, trying to find my purpose, right? And I think the way you articulate it in the book, like being a death doula is purposeful, but it's living that is actually the thing. And I just so appreciate that. But I'm just curious, what at what moment in your life did that kind of idea start to crystallize? Like having found this beautiful path of service.
I think it was after finding this beautiful path of service and realizing that my identity wasn't wrapped up in it,
Mm-hmm.
that who I was as a human wasn't wrapped up in it, that it's something that I did as an offering and as a service, but did not define who I was, because who I was had to be independent from what I do, um, because fuck capitalism. It's okay that I curse, right?
Yeah. Oh
Okay,
yeah.
you already
Yeah.
you already know. You already know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for real, like we've been, this idea of our work or having like some purpose for our lives tied to our work is so rooted deeply in capitalism that we all have to work to like pluck out of our bodies. And I I think once I started like looking at the vestiges of capitalism inside my body,
Mm-hmm.
started to realize that this wasn't going to be enough. This wasn't going to be it. Like if I can take the same awe and curiosity about the human condition into any sector of society, into doing nails, then I'm doing great.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking lately at now how I define success. And I think for some, I've reached it. But for me, I measure it. Well, they may think I've reached it because of perhaps how well the book has done, or this business, or my face being places. But for me, I'm so much more interested in how often I experience awe over the course of the day, or my moments of curiosity, where I can be like, oh, I wonder why that person is behaving like that. Or when how often I can like feel at rest in my body. Like that to me feels like success. And I can do that anywhere. I don't have to be doing it in my work necessarily in order to feel it. So separating the idea of like my purpose from my personhood
Mm-hmm.
um helped a lot. From my separating my purpose from my work helped a
Yeah.
lot and helped me ground it in my personhood. Yeah,
Hmm.
that helped a lot.
I find that especially when it comes to work that is in a service capacity, like this, what you're talking about is so important. And I find myself, and I'm going to just use myself as like the prime example of somebody who tends to burn out quite a bit, you know? And I'm curious if there's things that you remind yourself of or do to keep, it's like I feel like balance is kind of an illusion, in our world, but I'm curious, how do you keep yourself present in your body essentially, you know what I mean? Like, and how do you separate these two things, like not fully identifying just with the service that you provide?
Yeah. It's tricky. It's tricky, and it's something that I'm still cultivating consistently. Where I find that where I can find like awe and the curiosity about something is where I can tell I need to lean into this. When that starts going like blank for me, that's when I know I need to take a step back,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm no longer curious about it. I feel champagne bubbles over not that many things in work anymore. Honestly, I spend a lot of time talking to CPAs and like doing interviews, which is great to talk a lot about the work, but I'm not sitting with families or circles of support so much anymore. But every once in a while, there's a question or a contemplation of some sort. And I'm like, wow, what about that?
Mm-hmm.
Can I share with you one I had recently? That is just has not let me go.
Yeah.
So there's it's called the Humane Prison Hospice Project, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
where there are hospices and prisons founded by Lady Bird Morgan and now run by some other folks. But she reached out lately. We had a lovely conversation about where she's at now, and they're building a new women's prison in Chino here in California.
Wow.
And they are looking for volunteers and get the program set up or so. And in the conversation, she mentioned that with the prevalence of medical aid and dying drugs, it's surprising to her that we are still choosing to kill people on death row
Mm-hmm.
using lethal injection or all the other means that we currently use. And that was like 3 weeks ago that she mentioned this, I have not stopped thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like, why are we not? I understand, I'm not down for death row. Just
Yeah.
Point blank, bottom line. I'm not into it. I'm not into it. If we are continuing to choose that system, why not do it as humanely as possible? And I understand that humane and death row don't really go together, but if that's what we are choosing to do, why not do it in a humane way? I can't make it make any sense. It hasn't let me go. And that's where it's moments like that that help me see that not only am I not burnt out, because I'm still sparkly about something, but there is still plenty to get sparkly about in this work.
Yeah. You talk about death work as activism in the book too, which again is as a as somebody who's just, kind of new in the death work space, it really helped me to kind of see it in a way that is just it's just so powerful, and it's very, very expansive. Um, you write, for me, death work is activism at its core, fueled by anger, but cloaked in love. And that one line has resonated with me and stuck with me for a really long time too. Fueled by anger, but cloaked in love. And it feels like that's kind of what you're speaking of right now, in witnessing these injustices. You're asking these questions and going like, why the fuck? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. I don't know, it offends my sense of humanity. I mean, much like death row does on its face, but then when we're adding injury to injury to injury, like why not make it a little bit more humane? When I'm thinking about the ways in which people die across the world, and I think about how we access our death work, I feel absolutely certain that the way that we are in the world can shift if we honor death.
Mm-hmm.
I, I, I mean, I don't have tangible evidence for it, but I know it in my bones.
Yeah.
It's in my mitochondria. This is for real. That societies that revere death cannot also hold all of the injustices within them.
Mm-hmm.
We can't. There's no way we can have a million unhoused people.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way if we revere death. There's no way we can uphold racism. There's no way we can uphold transphobia. There's no way we can uphold any of those if we also revere death. And this is a way in which I think death work at its core is activist in nature.
Mm-hmm.
When I can show up in my fullness and honor somebody else's fullness, no matter who they are, where they come from, what they're angry about, how they voted, if I can hold them for exactly who they are, that is a radical fucking act. Because we don't get to do that anywhere else in society, you know? And so if I can really hold them, honor them, I don't see why I can't do it the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And if I do it the rest of the time, then there's no way I'm dropping bombs on them either.
Yeah.
Like those things don't go together.
Mm-hmm. I find myself talking about human supremacy a lot these days.
Ooh,
Like
juicy.
in every facet, and whether they're talking about what's happening in the Middle East or, elections, environmental causes, all the things, and just realizing how that to me seems to be at the core, like the core like issue, or I don't even know what the word would be, of everything that we're witnessing. And death is in that mix, because to me, what woke me up after the training was this realization that to be in right relationship with nature, to be in right relationship with the earth, means honoring death, honoring death and allowing that to be, and not fighting it, and to me, I feel like it's this notion of human supremacy, that where we kind of feel like we can we can be immortal. Like we can
Yeah.
break through that, we can beat it somehow,
Yeah.
and that idea of beating our humanity, or beating, this mortality, seems to be at the core of every single issue that we're seeing, like the mega crises that we're witnessing in the world.
100%. 100%. Um, Also, you just got me on something that is slipping through right now. It might be back. Let's see. No, the more I try to find it, the more it scampers away.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love this idea of human supremacy, where I'm always so tickled when people say that we're killing the planet. I'm like, no, bitch, she's gonna kill you. Okay, she's killing you. That's not how this works. Isn't it so funny? That's not how this works. We will die off. She'll be fine.
Seriously. Seriously.
Yeah,
No, 1,000%.
it's good.
Um, in your chapter on Peter, I really appreciate just again the sharing of your stories, your trip to Cuba, which was really pivotal for you, and the death of your brother-in-law. And you were writing that the death of a loved one sucks for everyone, but
Yeah.
what can we do to make it gentler? Just like a child calls attention to an ouchie, we also want to know someone cares, that we are hurting. And it just brought me back to this moment when my dad was dying in the hospital, and my brother and I. It was like news to us. Like our families had kept us kind of in the dark
Mm.
to shield us. So when we were in the hospital and literally watching him die, my brother was asking the doctors a lot of questions, and this is in Taiwan. And the doctor just couldn't be bothered, with the questions. And this is like, it's interesting because when I read that part, it brought up this memory that I had completely forgotten. And I remember my mom yelling at the doctor to take the time to answer my brother's questions about what was happening to my dad. And I think, what you're kind of talking about in the book is just, again, this was in Taiwan, but just um, the mm, the issues that we have with the healthcare system and the medical system, and just even as a death doula, being able to just be there, like a witness to what somebody is going through, to the pain, to the suffering, to everything that they're experiencing in that moment, feels to me to be it's like the most healing, the most helpful, the most supporting thing, even if all you were doing was just sitting there holding their hand. And so I'm curious for you, like, it seems like being a witness feels very foundational to death work as well.
I agree. I think it is. I think it is. Like that line that you read, I think sometimes we just want somebody to say, yeah, that does suck.
Hmm.
Or, yeah, that really, this sounds very difficult for you.
Hmm.
And mean it. It's the
Yeah.
second part of it. But to be present in it with you without having all the solutions or the answers, because I think the vast majority of the time we're not looking for solutions or answers anyway. I think we just want like a buddy in the pain.
Hmm.
Um, and that to me is what death work is for in large purpose, which is being there,
Yeah.
it's accompanying, to walk
Hmm.
alongside, to journey with, and less about the doingness of it, which is something that I try to keep hammering in the trainings when students come in and they're expecting like steps 1 through 15 about how to death doula. You start here, then you do this, and you do that, and I'm like, nah, we gotta take it out of our brains because that's not where the work lives, at all, at all. It's in the body, it's in the being, it's in the presence. That means that I got to clear out as much as I can along the way so I can actually be present for what the person needs, which is me to just be present, not trying to
Hmm.
fix, not trying to make everything better for them, struggling with my own inadequacy in the face of their pain or their sorrow,
Hmm.
and just witness their
Hmm.
experience. I think it's a central part of the work.
The word allowance keeps on wanting to come up for me,
Juicy.
and I see this as I see this a lot in my medicine work too, as I'm guiding people through like their psychedelic journeys and things like that. The more I put myself in there, the less they're going to receive out of it, and the more probably they're going to have a horrible journey and experience that I don't want to give them. And so it's almost like just being able to take myself out, but create the container that allows them to feel safe enough to go through what they're going through. And it feels very much like what you're talking about as well.
I feel that very strongly. For a long time, people would often call me a healer, and it made me
Same.
so uncomfortable because I'm like, nah, not really. Like, I'm just present while it's happening in front of me. I think sometimes it is about the container setting, but I think the container setting can also just be my presence. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I showed up.
Mm-hmm.
I showed up. I showed up. And I brought all of my trauma and my history with me because I can't help myself. But I've done enough work so that it's not the center of the room like you can
Mm-hmm.
be. And I can just be here, with my hands up, holding you from the back. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, that to me is really powerful. And I wish that's more how we talked about the work, you know? So often people want to know, what does a doula do? And I'm like, we're a support person and support. What does
Mm-hmm.
that mean? Support. It means a lot of things to do. Yes, I can tick off like all the 15 things, but also we show up. We show up and do our best to decenter ourselves. It's tricky. It's tricky for me lately anyway, I'll say, because so so often I hear people talking about me and what I have created.
Mm-hmm.
Um, for an example, there was a student that was at an event that we went to,
Mm-hmm.
and I said something really off the cuff about bodies, moisturizing bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And she started realizing part of the reason she hasn't been moisturizing her body is because of her relationship with her body. And she went into some sexual trauma and just what her relationship with her body has been like thus far, and started to take the step to moisturizing her body every day. And she's like, I think I'm healing all that trauma through that. And she thanked me. And I said, hold on a minute. All I said was put on some lotion. That's it.
Yeah.
You did everything else. And I said it like a throwaway thing too. I did not mean to put any oomph or force behind it. But look how much healing she created for herself.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's got nothing to do with me at all. At all. There, people are doing it for themselves all over the place. You know, I wrote some words on the paper and then you're having like a whole spiritual experience. Look at you go. That's not me. That's not mine. That's you. That's all you. Yeah, it's fascinating. It's cool.
I love that you named that. I love that you named that. I too
Definitely.
have this like please don't ever call me a healer because it just feels yeah, it's like it's almost a responsibility on you that it's like it's not mine, you know.
It's not
Um
fair. It's not fair to me. It's also not fair to you. Like you were doing a lot of work. Like take credit.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
exactly. Well, I will what I will say is that I'm actually curious. Do you know what your human design is?
A manifesting generator.
Are you really?
Yeah.
I am too. I would have sworn that you were like a reflector because I feel like there's something about you being able to see people very clearly, but that to me is a testament of the work that you've done to
Mm,
be able to empty out so that you can be kind of this like clear mirror for others to be able to receive these little, you know, nuggets that they need to receive that their bodies or their spirits are actually like clamoring onto, you know.
yeah.
So,
Well, I
yeah.
hope it works for them.
Yeah, a hundred
Yeah.
percent.
Yeah.
No. Um, I kind of want to go into a little bit of the racism also that you talk in the book that is, you know, I think inherent in the work, in the death work. And you talk about a client that you named Nancy and this situation where this woman asked you if you were black. And again, she has Alzheimer's, but it was such an interesting thing to receive in the book because I was like, oh, I didn't even realize that that would be an issue, you know, yeah, like a thing at all. Um, and you write, my presence in this field is important because when death care is done without awareness of difference, privilege, and bias, it can be used as a weapon, further marginalizing communities and people at one of the rawest, most excruciatingly painful moments of their life. This matters. It matters in the same way people want their identities validated in life, they want that in death too. I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. One of the things that I saw really early when I started doing this work, not only did I see just a lot of white faces, but I
Mm-hmm.
also started noticing the the way that people spoke about the people that were dying as though they were all one or that they all shared characteristics. Often the prototype in their head was white,
Mm-hmm.
and that was evident in how they talked about the person, even though maybe nobody ever said. But also, I think as we know, living in this country for a while, white people talk about and for and to white people generally, unless they've done enough work to recognize that not everybody is white, and thus they can broaden the scope of who they're talking to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it it I'm not going to say it surprised me necessarily, but it felt dangerous in death care in particular because what I'm trying to do, I think generally what we're trying to do is honor the individual and the individual lived experience. Now, our individual lived experiences differ just by virtue of like, two human bodies looking through our individual experience of I, but
Mm-hmm.
also there's a lot heaped on our bodies based on certain markers. And those markers show up in how I access medicine. They show up in how the doctors treat me, my blood pressure, my hair, who I trust, how my body responds in certain circumstances. It is important. It
Yeah.
matters in how we die. And to look at us all as though we approach death and dying the same way, to me, was like such a failure
Mm-hmm.
on the part of folks that I would really, really like to have their eyes open to our difference. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we get to honor the unique lived experience in death, the unique lived experience. And my unique lived experience is informed by every aspect of who I am,
Mm-hmm.
my socioeconomic status, my college education, my law degree, the color of my skin, the way my brain works, every single part of it. And to deny one aspect of it is to make the rest crumble because they all
Yeah.
come together to make me. And so we must pay attention to all parts of the individual, but we must also watch out for the things within us that makes us not able to see that in other humans. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you're speaking, what occurs to me is that curiosity and not assuming, curiosity and just being open to the fact that you may not know, or open to the idea that I don't know, seems to be the thing to, I don't know, keep us in our lanes, or be open to the idea of honoring somebody else's experience. Because I feel like it's whenever we try to assert our own experience of death or our own knowledge of death that we kind of sometimes come up short in that. But to me, it feels like curiosity is really kind of where we can safeguard in a sense. Like,
And it's also just more fun that way. When you get to learn about somebody
yeah.
that way. I love humans. I love humans. I love individuals. Everybody has a unique story of their lives. And even the most bland and basic one that I can think of has something in there that's going to be kind of juicy. And if we can stay curious about the human in front of us, I think that opens up space for us to not make assumptions about who they are, what they want,
Mm-hmm.
what they value in their lives. And that ultimately leads to us being able to honor them in their death as well.
Yeah. You also spoke about another story in which you were confronted with a client who was very much just directly, blatantly racist to your face, and feeling that sense of um, unsafety in that environment. And I'm curious for it's interesting because it's like in this service, I feel like in that story, what I was learning for myself was you still have to come first. Like your safety, your what you need still has to come first. And that's something for, again, I very much like struggle with this, like giving too much and spilling over too much, where I'm just constantly like almost like self-martyring, for the other. And it's truly like my lesson to learn in this lifetime. And this year has been a big part of that. But I'm curious, if you were to go through that experience again, would you have just said no right at the very, very get go?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. It is hard to say because on some ways also I learned so much from it, but I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't want to put myself in that situation again. It was violent to my being.
Mm-hmm.
That man hated people that wear my skin. Like there was no reason for me to be there. And his sons invited me into that space, knowing exactly what it was that they were doing, but did it anyway. And it looks to me like whiteness for centuries, and all the ways in which white folks have used the bodies of Black folks to their benefit and then discarded when no longer serving them. And yet here I am, a Black death doula who's doing her best to try to bring like honor to the totality of the lived experience for everybody, regardless of race. It's quite a thing,
Mm-hmm.
you know? It's
Yeah.
like we've died in all types of unnatural ways. We've died in violent ways and awful ways for centuries, centuries, centuries at the hands of white people. And yet white folks can still call me into the space and say, now do me too.
Yeah.
And it's just sickening,
Yeah.
frankly.
Is there a desire for you in witnessing the way death work is actually expanding? Like I feel like over the last couple of years, it's been, I don't think it's just on me. I think it's like I'm literally feeling the collective really respond to this work and more people being called to this work. I'm curious, like, what do you want to see? And I know this is a huge question, and it's like so broad, but is there some place or something that you're hoping to witness the evolution of within death work?
I'll tell you what, the things that I dreamed of the world 10 years ago are already here.
Mm.
And so, and watching like what the students of the course are doing with the work is beyond my wildest imagination. It's so fun to me just to be like, they are doing what? Or when folks just for the first time explain what it is that they're into or how they got to the training or why. I'm like, God, dog, these people are incredible. That is so exciting, to watch it show up in so many different places. So a student the other day called themselves maybe like a climate change doula or something of the
Oh
sort. And I was like,
man.
yeah, I'm into it. I'm into it. Another student not that long ago is a hairdresser and shared the grief rituals that she does with her clients as she's cutting their hair because it's
That's
dead
so
and she's
awesome.
cutting the dead stuff off. Like,
That's
what
so
are you talking
awesome.
about? That's so cool. That's so cool. Um, so, this is already beyond my wildest dreams, already beyond my wildest dreams. I would love it if everybody was out here talking about what they feared, their deep existential dread, and got really vulnerable with each other all the time, were transparent about the things that they struggled with and their grief, that people would talk very openly about their end of life wishes, or doctors would get better education on death care. That would be
Yeah.
incredible. That would be really, really cool. I would love to see death doulas in every strata of society. I would love it if there were death doulas in the military, if there was people um, that taught people grief or shared space for people to be in grief in
Mm.
the military as they were learning how to also shoot weapons. That would be great.
Oh my
In
gosh. Yeah.
schools, right? Police departments, fire departments, the post office. Like, let's do it all. Let's get death supportive people everywhere.
Mm.
And hopefully that won't be 10 more years, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see. We got to make a shift toward compassion again, though. We got to make a
Oh,
shift back toward compassion.
yeah.
Big time.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Big
Especially
time.
after this year. That's actually a perfect segue into my next question. I think I have really been struggling this year, obviously, with so much that's happening, to stay focused actually on my offering of death work, which is really through psychedelic medicines and stuff, and have been finding myself needing massive, like big pockets of just kind of rest, kind of like tending to my body, tending and just focusing on my own care. And I'm curious because I think we are collectively witnessing so much change right now, in the world. A lot of it very, very devastating. How have you been navigating this moment in time? And what are some of the things that you've been, I guess, putting into practice or holding on to keep you also focused? Because you launched this book this year. It already feels like it's been around for a while. I think maybe that's the feeling of how packed this year has been with yeah, change and dramatic things. Um, and so yeah, I'm just curious, like, how have you been navigating this space?
It's tricky.
Hmm.
It's tricky. There are multiple acts of genocides that are occurring
Yeah.
in front of our eyes, which is something that I don't think we've seen before in human history, where I can pick up the phone and see what's happening on the other side of the world to people that would never come across my face or my path in my life otherwise. And yet here I am finding myself weeping for their grandparents and the children that they'll never have or their histories, um, thinking about the fear that they may be living in right now day by day, wondering whether or not new bombs are coming or what happened to their mom. She was supposed to be here yesterday and she never came. And for somebody whose heart has always been broken by how people die, it's hard. It's been really, really, really hard. Um, the things that I find that I can do, it feels a lot of times like there isn't anything that I can do, and that's where I think the lies come in. Um, But that's where sometimes the need for rest comes in, because I feel often so like exhausted by the amount of pain and grief that it feels difficult to like do much of anything. And yet, when the opportunities come, mostly in my interviews, it means that I get to name the grief and the sadness that I'm carrying, and who I'm carrying this for, and what's happening right now that's gotten me here. This past year has probably been, I'm not going to say more work, but I've been certainly talking a lot more about the work than I have maybe since 2018 or so, when I was just everywhere. This year all over again. But it means to me a great opportunity to say as many times as possible that we need to think, we need to think a lot more about how we honor death across the board. Because like I was saying earlier, we cannot revere death and do these things that are happening right now. We can't let those two things cannot coexist. We need a lot more compassion, but I think we also need a lot more compassion for people's grief. One thing I find myself doing a lot is honoring my grief, and that's the first place to begin. Is I am with my grief. It allows me to be able to identify it easier in others, and sometimes understand that the vitriol is their grief that's talking. Understand that people wanting things to look a certain way or be a certain way is them mad at the system, but it's really easy to put it there. But you are grieving, so be with your grief right now. And I'm giving myself space to grieve. That's how I've been holding it. I grieve. I grieve. I do my work around it, and I name it as often as possible. And it pisses some people off. But also at this point in my life, I've gotten kind of used to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I appreciate that so much. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just this year I started a monthly grief circle just
Cool.
for anybody, just free community offering. And I'm finding that even as the facilitator, I'm receiving so much. Like I needed this circle, and it's just even being in the space of others who are grieving. There's an energy there that gives my heart permission to sort of break open and fall apart in those spaces also. And it's been hugely healing for me, just showing up myself again, facilitating. But it's so it's so much more, so much for more for me than even the people that I feel like are being called to it.
I get it. And good for you for doing it, because you need it too. I
Yeah.
think that so much of the work is like, well, what would I have needed? And granted, this doesn't mean take away the agency of the person that you're serving or doing it with you as a center, but rather creating what it was that I don't see in the world.
Right.
And it's something I say so often in the chorus. It's like, if you see that there's something missing, go make it. It means that you are the one to make it. Go make it. I'm glad that you're doing this. Yeah, it's necessary right now.
Mm.
It's necessary. I think that as we spend more time tending to our grief and being like getting honest with it and with ourselves, it does allow us to be able to see it in others and then hold others in their grieving space, even though sometimes their grieving space looks like things that I don't like or I
Mm.
don't want, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
then I can still hold your grief. Sometimes it shows up as anger.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it shows up as promiscuity, although I hate that word.
Mm-hmm.
But grief looks like all types of things. And when I can honor my own, then I can see it easier in others, which allows me to have greater compassion across the board.
Yeah. It feels inextricably tied to also the way that we are in relationship with death, right? It's like if we can't honor our grief, then we can't honor our death also. It just seems like one and what not one and the same, but yeah, very much tied together.
Very
So
juicy.
us being like pain averse, collectively and really globally, I feel like this is this is the invitation of the moment. I feel like how can we meet our grief and allow it, like I keep on coming back to this word allow, but allow it to be there
Mhm.
and honor it.
Mhm.
There's something really beautiful about, I think, who you are, and it's something that I experienced particularly, yes, in the book, but also just in your presence during the training. During our graduation, you had this really beautiful like um this beautiful essentially offering or ritual where you allowed everyone to share the beauty that they see in each other, the beauty that they see in the person who's receiving the diploma, the certificate. And that experience splintered me like into a bazillion pieces. And in everything that we're talking about today, the power of being seen, I think it's like now the tears are coming. The power of being seen, I think, is the most healing and the most, there's really no word for it. Like just being seen, just being there, being present, being seen, you know? And I think that's something that you really bring to your spaces. And this is a really weird thing to say, but I felt very seen even listening to your book, you know. And at the very very end, I listened through even like the credits, the think, which I never do. Okay, never ever do. And you had a shout out to all the students that you've had in the Going with Grace containers, and
Yeah.
I like freaking cried. Like it was just, and again, like I don't I don't do this very often with people. There was something about that gratitude that just, like, yeah, splintered me again.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you for that. But also, thank you for the ways in which you show up in the world that make me feel seen also. I I don't say this lightly at all, but I learn just as much in the courses. I learn in every retreat. I learn from each one of you all. I've learned from people that have, stopped me on the street to share something, or somebody at the party I ended up talking to too long when my man was trying to leave because they were grieving and we just could not stop. Like, I feel seen too, incredibly. And I think it's part of the reason why, well, I know it's part of the reason why when it looked like I was writing a book, I was like, it has to be this way, is because if I can just put all of it out there, then maybe somebody feels a little bit less alone. If I talk about all my insecurity and my doubt, of which I still have plenty, if I can talk about the depths of depression, of which I still carry, then maybe somebody who's out there will say, you know what? Shit, me too. And that makes me feel so much better. Like maybe I can still witness somebody from a distance. Yeah, because there's the being seen, but then there's also like the witness to that. So we still get to do death work. Like even though I can't actually see, the people in their homes doing the thing, I can still witness them in a way. Can I tell you a really rad story?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So I was in Denver, Colorado. I just finished a speaking gig and I parked my friend's car someplace. She let me borrow it. It was a very, very fancy, expensive car. Okay. She was going through a divorce and she bought herself like something pretty to play with. But I borrowed it and she said, please park in the parking garage. So I did. And I was looking for it. I'd lost it. I could not find it. I don't have a sense of direction. I didn't know where this car was. And I was starting to panic a little bit, but I had like 3 or 4 more parking garages to go to before I was in full panic. As I'm walking down the street, panicking about this car, I saw a human walking toward me with just light in their eyes, wearing these red cat eye glasses and some gold lame like leggings with cheetah print all over them. And I thought, wow, look at this person just walking around so in love with life. Everything's just fine. Like I'm going to be fine. So I am feeling joyful and hopeful all of a sudden. And as this human passes me, I say to them, nice leggings. And she looks at me and she goes, holy shit, you're Alua Arthur. I'm listening to your book right now.
Oh my God.
The point I wanted to make, I mean, it was just, I have goosebumps, but the point I wanted to make was how the energetic cycle worked there
Mm-hmm.
because I was struggling. I looked at her, I felt hope. I felt hope. I thought, okay, everything's okay. Maybe everything's actually going to be okay. But what was happening for her was that she was listening to me say something similar to her. You know, this world is wild, but that loop, that cycle is happening unseen all the time, all the time. So, yes, I put some words on some pages and people are reading them, and I receive plenty in that too. I also feel seen, I also feel witnessed, and that feels pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that, how much I needed that in this moment, because exactly as you named, it's like sometimes you just kind of go about your life and you're putting these things out there and hoping, this podcast being one of them, actually hoping that people get something out of it, that they feel your
Yeah.
heart in some sort of way, and yeah, to have that sort of just such a profound validation in that moment feels really, it's such a good reminder for me to just to realize just keep on listening and keep on, showing up.
Yes, the magic abounds. The magic abounds. I think something else that maybe a component of it is that when I was writing, I would often just sit in rooms by myself, deep in nature someplace, or in like Topanga. But I went to the mountains a bunch, I went to the desert a bunch, just solo, click, clack, clacking, not for anybody necessarily, not for the young human with the leggings on the street, but for me. I needed to get these things out. I needed to say these things. I felt it was necessary to do so. And by doing that, then that amplified out there. I think if I was trying to create it for somebody else, it probably would not have landed like it did.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
That is medicine.
Do you,
Yeah.
boo? Do you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love you so much. I thank
Is that
you
it?
so much. That's it.
Oh, man, Ellen.
Is there anything else you want to say?
Everything else I want to say.
I'm just very, very touched, honored, humbled, blessed to know you.
No, I feel the same.
Yeah.
I feel the same. I feel the same. It's really a gift to be in your afterglow. You shine so bright, and it's like little sparkles and twinkles for the rest of us. So thank you for doing your work to move off that sludge so we could see how brightly you shine.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you guys so much for joining this conversation with Alua and me. I am really just very honored and very humbled to be able to bring this conversation out through this podcast. If you have any nudges that you're feeling towards death work, or are feeling just even the slightest bit curious, I highly recommend the Going with Grace in-person retreat. I think the online course is just as powerful, but there's something about being in a retreat setting with other people who are willing to be vulnerable and to talk about some really sometimes challenging topics like death and grief and everything in between. And this is like the most colorful bunch of people you'll ever meet. I really believe that, death workers are like my people. They just exude life. They love life so much. And I think that's really part of what brings them into this work too. So I highly recommend that retreat. And again, if you haven't read this book, it's such a beautiful memoir. And I think it really kind of introduces you or invites you into some very, very beautiful truths about death. And I think it's a very, very easy read, but it's also a very necessary read for anybody who is finding themselves thinking about death or challenged by grief or trying to find their way through grief. I think books like these really make you feel seen and that you are not walking alone in any of this. In fact, all of us, it's the unifying factor. We all die. And I think the way Alua has put it into words is just such a needed offering in this world, especially right now, as we're witnessing a lot of death and destruction among all of us, around the world. So highly recommend it. If you feel called, please rate and review us. Take the time and leave a comment. Bring this discourse into your loving spaces with family, friends, colleagues. I think the more we can all talk about this in a more open way, death, grief, and our experiences with loss and with change and transformation, I think the better off we are in walking towards our own end of life with less regret and with a bit more spaciousness and a lot more grace, which is exactly what Alua teaches in Going with Grace. Sending all so much love. Until next time.